All right, I want to welcome Mubin Shaikh to the program today. Mubin is an expert on radicalization, de-radicalization, countering violent extremism, and his book is called The Undercover Jihadi Inside the Toronto Eight. I just want to welcome you to the program and thanks for your time today. Um, I guess maybe we'll just start out by maybe having you tell everybody what it is that you do or as much as you can tell us as to what it is that you do.
Well, my current job title, I guess, would be government level consultant. I am an expert on these topics you mentioned. It's mostly under counterterrorism. So I deal extensively with governments in particular the U.S. government, the Canadian government, of course. I'm a Canadian citizen. I'll be traveling to Poland, Bulgaria, the Ministry of Interior there, looking at the security dimensions of the refugee crisis. So I do training like this to police units, military intelligence. I've addressed out at the United Nations General Assembly, spoke there. So I'm an expert in the topic, at least that's what they tell me, and just live and breathe this stuff. I think, if I can quickly just give my life story. I'm born and raised in Toronto, Canada. Public school by day, Quran school by night. Caring, nurturing environment, mixed gender versus, uncaring, very austere environment in the Quran school. I went through middle school, no problem. High school, wasn't bullied, wasn't picked on. Actually, we were the cool kids. I had this house party one day. My uncle, my father's brother, walked in on a house party. Oh my God, what have you done? It was the end of the world. Coming from a Muslim family, you don't do this stuff. Girls in home, people drinking, smoking weed. Made me feel so guilty and so bad about my life that I said, I have to get religious. That's the only way I can cleanse myself of this stain. So 1995, 18 years of age, go to India and Pakistan. While I'm in Pakistan, I'm walking around, I have a chance to encounter with the Taliban. Didn't know who they were. This was right before they took over Afghanistan. I met them. I was talking to them. They were amazed that they're Muslims like me in Canada. They were telling me jihad is the way. It was just like a few hours with them. But when I returned back to Canada in the fall of 95, they had taken over Afghanistan. So they did what they said they were going to do. So I then started to hang out with guys who were more global jihadi culture. All right, never mind the specific groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS today, or even Taliban. The global jihadist culture. It was, the infidel invader. All right, fight him wherever he is. That was the plan. 1998 was Bin Laden's fatwa against the world. So we killed Bin Laden and were supporters. And of course, 9/11 happened, and for me personally, it was the day that I decided there's something fundamentally wrong with flying planes into buildings. And I thought, you know what, I don't know my religion properly. Let me go and study. So I then sold my belongings. I was married. I had 2 kids even at the time. I went to Syria in early 2002. Spent 2 years there studying Arabic, Islamic studies. I had a moderate scholar, to debunk my interpretations verse by verse. I came to see the error of my ways, if you will, that the interpretations these people use are an aberration, they're a deviation. I returned to Canada in 2002 and effectively called up the security intelligence service and said, hey, I'm back, maybe I can help. And they agreed. They vetted me, of course. I was polygraphed, and I became an undercover operative. I did infiltration operations for almost 2 years. I won't talk about any of those except for the last one because it became a public prosecution called Toronto 18 in 2006 when 18 guys, Muslim guys, were arrested for terrorism charges. I then spent 4 years in court as a fact witness. Then in 2010, when the case was done, I got onto Twitter and Facebook to see what was going on. Suddenly in 2012, I started to see the rise of ISIS foreign fighters. So I started to debate them and argue with them and troll them and try to talk guys out of it. For all of 2013, all of 2014, and a lot of 2015, I was online with these guys, with ISIS foreign fighters all the time, many of whom are now dead, of course. So in that time, I got screenshots, I thematically arranged my interactions with them, and now I present this to government agencies.
Wow, that's quite a story. I was looking on your Wikipedia, and I noticed it doesn't mention the word Islam. And you know how in the world today, like this is such a big deal. People want to label something. They want to say
Yeah.
radical Islam. Is there a reason why you don't say Islam or bring up like you talk about radicalization and de-radicalization?
Right.
And I think most people when they think about that, they automatically think Muslim or Islam. So could you maybe clarify that a little bit?
Sure. So the term that I use is TIC, terrorist in Islamic costume, or terrorism in Islamic costume. Now, that's, a lot of words, a lot of letters. So we, because in our society we want to be quick and simple, so we're hearing terms like Islamist is another term that's been used out there, or jihadist is another term. And the reason why I use terrorism in Islamic costume is because we have to identify that these guys are citing Islamic scriptures. They're not citing other scriptures. So that is the face of the way that academics today study radicalization. They look at it across the board. Radicalization is the process whereby people come to take on increasingly extreme views. Okay, so radicalization doesn't always lead to violence. All right, so there is what's called regular radicalization and then violent radicalization. So regular radicalization is, civil rights people, whether it's the women's suffrage movement, things like that. It's all legit stuff that people want to change society for the good. But then you have violent extremism, where they might think that it's to change the society for good, but they believe you can only accomplish that through violence in public spaces. Okay, so if you believe in using violence, then you can join the military and you can commit violence on behalf of your state, and that's perfectly legitimate. But if you decide to use it on the public space, then that's not allowed and that's illegal and obviously not legitimate. So there's radicalization, which applies to all sorts of people, whether it's white supremacists, ultra-nationalists, even urban street gangs, right? You can look at that process. So because of Muslims involved in these kinds of attacks, terrorist attacks, because in particular the U.S. especially is at war in many Muslim nations, then of course we begin to make synonymous radicalization with Islam.
Okay, well that helps. I guess the next thing that is a big topic in Canada and the U.S. is immigration. Everybody's worried about the immigration. The ISIS and ISIL and Al Qaeda. They've all said that they're going to use these immigrants. They're going to infiltrate them. Do you think that people should be more worried today now, or do you think that it's a lot of talk and it's being blown out of proportion?
Well, let's maybe there's something in the middle. I remember, I believe it was 2014 when the first reports of ISIS talking about sending people over emerged. I was watching this conversation, and of course, that's exactly something that they would do. They've stated it very clearly. We're starting to see some instances, not so much of bona fide ISIS members amongst the Syrian refugees. There are some cases. There are handfuls of cases. Now, if you look at Europe's problem is much worse because you have literally people showing up in boats landing on shores. So the vetting process is far, far more difficult for the European context. But for somebody to get to North America, in Canada, we did the same thing. We have like 25,000 that we brought in. And we had the same kind of conversations. But understand that these were people who were already in refugee camps that had been administered by other especially Jordan in particular. I mean, Jordan's vetting process is, absolutely top notch. So these were people who had been vetted like 6 ways to Sunday, so to speak. Those were the kinds of people that were coming over to Canada. It wasn't people showing up on boats. So the threat is there. It's very specific depending on if you're in Europe or North America. And in particular for the American case, no one can guarantee 100% that there's not going to be even one person. Absolute security is not possible. It's just never been achieved. So for the American context, it's not going to work. Even if one person goes off, it'll make the whole system look bad. But generally speaking, and for the most part, the American vetting system that would be bringing in these refugees is much, much better than what you're seeing in Europe.
Okay. And so, these people are coming over here, they're Muslims, and as we know, most of them are peaceful, really good people. But I want to talk about the religion a little bit. I'm not an expert.
Sure.
I really started looking at the religion a year ago because, it just was in the news a lot, and I just sort of woke up to it. And I wonder, like they say that these, they always try to like separate these radical people from the religion. They say they're not true Muslims. They don't really follow Islam. But from what I can read and what I can see is that they're kind of taking almost literally some of the text that they read, and applying it in Western civilization. And it's not really, it doesn't fit with some of the things over here. So what is your opinion on that? Are they true Muslims? Are they following Islam, or are they really ruining the religion for real Muslims that are trying to live in their lifestyle and follow their beliefs?
Yeah, there's a number of ways to look at this. So the approach that I take is this is what I learned in Syria. When I came to them with my ideas, they basically said to me, first of all, they're like, well, you have no training in this subject, so you actually can't interpret these verses. You don't know the context in which the verse was revealed. All these things I didn't study. It was, like you mentioned, a very literal reading, very superficial reading, to the point where even in your physical clothing, you wear robes, you wear big beards. And hey, you know what? People are free to wear whatever they want, cover up as much or uncover up as much as they like. But the reality is that there is a cultural element to clothing. So when a lot of these Muslims, replicate cultural clothing, you see it's very superficial, and it mirrors the way that they approach the scriptures. So, for example, there was a scholar recently who said, look, we need to update some of these religious laws. Because back in the day, they rode camels, you had slaves. This is 1,400 years ago, remember.
Right.
It was a desert-like society, nomadic culture. If you stole, they cut your hand off. If you killed somebody, they cut your head off, right? Not like, sawing it off with a camera there and multiple angles. Like what ISIS has done is taken Saw, the movie Saw, right, to a whole other level. So what they're doing is they're taking these, particular examples and then making it the rule by which everyone has to follow and live by. So even in the Islamic tradition, there is, and this gets a little technical, there was an ancient sect called the Khawarij, they were called. One of the things they did is they would declare other Muslims as not Muslim enough, and now you're therefore an infidel, and we got to kill all the infidels, so now I got to kill you. So, of course, who does ISIS kill more than any other group? Other Muslims. Right? So they are, it's the equivalent of like this ancient evil sect that's been resurrected. Now, pardon me, I just have to get a little theological. Muslims, alongside Christians, believe that Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, is the Messiah. He is, the Messiah of God, that he will come again at a second coming, and we will live under his authority, right? And Muslims actually believe this as well as Christians. Now, there are traditions, there's a statement by the Prophet, peace be upon him, who said that these groups, this group called the Khawarij, will appear again and again throughout history until from their last remnants, the Antichrist will emerge. Okay? There's a second reference that says the Antichrist will emerge on the road between Iraq and Syria, okay, which happens to be ISIS turf. All right? So from the Muslim theological perspective, and this is the perspective that I use when I argue with them or when I used to argue with them, to delegitimize their narrative, I would say to them, you're not Muslims, you're actually the army of the Antichrist. You're not a caliphate, you're an Antichrist state, right? So it's psychological operations, thrown in there, a little bit of reverse psychology. And this is one of the reasons why, back to your first question of, radical Islam, like what label can we use? And this is one of the reasons why some people go out of their way to say, well, I don't want to use the wrong word because, I'm trying to do this delegitimization narrative, and that's the way we're going to do it. So a group like ISIS are by Islamic standards, have left Islam. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said they were Muslims, but they became disbelievers, right? He also says, they would quote the Quran. The Quran would not go past their throat, meaning it was just in the throat. It was very superficial.
Okay.
Wherever you find them, kill them. They are the dogs of hell. They are the worst of creation. So this is the approach that I've taken with them with respect to their participation in Islam.
Okay. That makes sense. Like I kind of got into this by listening a lot to Majid Nawaz and Sam Harris. And
Yep.
I think they kind of break it out into three, or I know Sam Harris does. I'm not sure about Majid. They disagree on things, but Sam Harris breaks it out into kind of three types of groups. You've got your violent jihadists. You've got your Muslims that are sympathetic to jihadists and support their cause quietly. They're nonviolent. They won't be radicalized. They won't hurt people, but
Yep.
they support it. And then you've got your loving Muslims, which is the majority of people that aren't radicalized. They don't support it. They don't want to have anything to do with it, but they stay quiet because, as you said earlier, these other Muslims will kill them if they speak up. So they're in this
Yeah.
terrible state. And
I
so
had a similar breakdown. It went Islamo-zealot, as I called him. That's the violent one. Then you have your sympathizer, and that's the one that, they'll be happy if something happens, or they don't cooperate with law enforcement. They didn't even look Muslim. They might dress the part, they might not dress the part. They might be, beer drinking, prostitute visiting, but they still have that inside them. And then you have what are called secular moderates, religious moderates, and then at the end you have your lapsed Muslims, right? So there's a whole spectrum.
So do you buy into the idea that the religion needs to be reformed? Like Majid has talked about, that they need to reform it. Like we look at Christianity and like the Crusades,
Absolutely.
and they were worse, right? But they reformed, and like that's what I think. But again, obviously I'm not an expert, and it's not something I could influence. But yeah, from your point of view, you would agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting is when the Christian world went through it, it was very bloody. Even the Reformation process itself was very bloody. So when people say Islam or the Muslim world needs a reformation, then understand that it's going to be accompanied with a lot of blood. If you look at European states, when they moved away from the monarchy to, states, it was very bloody. There were, it was like hundreds of years of wars. If we were looking for that now, I mean, we're going to just see more and more war. So the answer, absolutely, it needs a revival, actually, not so much a reform, because there is for example, there was a scholars meeting in United Arab Emirates. The scholar's name is Bin Bayya, so B-I-N, and then last name is Bayya, B like Bravo, A-Y-Y-A-H. And if you were to Google search Bin Bayya, outdated laws, Islam, you will see that he talks about these things. He says, for example, like, get rid of this, if you leave Islam, you got to kill the person, right? Like things like that. Because back in the day, if you left the group, you were going to join the enemy. It was like a battlefield conversion. So they're not going to let you go. In war times, you would have a battlefield execution. There was no. But today we don't live in that environment. People have the right to do what they want. We live in this larger society. So things like that. Or the Quran says cut off the hand of the one who steals. Okay. Well, 1,400 years ago, you could do that, right? That's what they did. But today, you don't need to do that, right? There are other ways in which you can punish it. Like, theft will always be a crime. It will always be a sin, right? You're not taking that away. You're not changing what God said. This is the problem with a lot of these, zealot-minded or even conservative-minded Muslims. They believe that if you move anything, if you change anything, you're changing the word of God, which is ridiculous because their argument in effect is saying God is stuck in the 7th century in some Arabian desert, and that's ridiculous.
Yeah, they're basically saying we can never evolve. We'll always have to stay where we're at. Yeah, it's
What's
really
interesting is that the Muslim world was, for many, many years, for centuries, there was a lot of science. We read about this all the time. Mathematics, astronomy, you name it. The theologians were the scientists. But today, you don't see that. Today, there is a complete separation from these higher learning. The Muslim world is simply not engaging in it, whether it's because they're living under dictatorships or whatever. The reality is that in the Islamic history, there was a lot of interfaith learning, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. There were good periods, there were bad periods. That's with any civilization. But the point is, if you can show that there was a good period, then it tells you that it's not Islam itself. It's something to do with the condition today.
Right. And I guess a follow-up to that is, we have this divide between, you brought up conservatives, we have this divide between liberal and conservative thinking today. The liberals are like in utter, denial, and then the conservatives are, in some cases overreacting. And so we're not getting anywhere, and nobody wants to talk about it. And it's like, I think Muslims or Islam is open to criticism. It's like anything else, and
like anything else.
I think we can talk about it, and we should be able to talk about it. But these liberals will just shut the conversation down. The minute you bring it up, you're a racist, even though Islam's not a race. They immediately you're a racist, and they bully people into silence. Do you think people are going to come together on this and talk about it? And do you think that those third type of Muslims will be able to rise up? And do you think we need somebody like Trump to make something like that happen, to actually go in and kill these ISIS people that are ruining the religion, and have everybody living in fear? Like, do they need to be obliterated in order for this religion to, get to a place where everybody doesn't look at it the way they do?
Yeah, this is something that I know the overwhelming majority of Muslims feel. Anytime some nutbag goes off and does something and, says the name of Islam or Allahu Akbar, it makes every single Muslim look bad. But I want to answer directly. First of all, they need to be obliterated, okay? The Prophet said about the Khawarij that when you find them, kill them. All right? So when I give a presentation to this effect to special forces, wherever they may be, I show them this. I actually have it up on the screen, and I show them that, hey, these are Prophet's orders. Right? And the reality is that it's Muslims who are on the front lines fighting these guys right now. Right. Now, the problem is that there are bigger geopolitical games being played. So if you look at Syria, okay, Russia has 2 major bases in Syria. That is their point of entry into Europe, right? It's a place where they can project their power. They're not going to leave Syria. And Assad is their proxy guy, so they're not going to get rid of him. So surprise, surprise, ISIS is doing just fine in Syria, okay? Now, if you look at Iraq, Iraq is basically a client state of Iran, right, who's buddies with Russia, right? So they're not going to let anything go on in Iraq. You see ISIS is alive and well because it's a proxy for them to use against the Sunni majority, which is who ISIS is fighting. They're fighting the Muslims, the majority Muslim population. Yes, they're killing Shia as well, of course.
Right.
But there seems to be there are greater political games being played, which allows ISIS to, be alive and well in places like Syria. So, I've worked closely with Special Operations Command, Central Command, U.S., where we were talking about missions going, like 2 years ago about wanting to go into Syria, but the Russians preventing that. In Iraq, the Turks want to go to fight, but the Iraqis are preventing the Turks because the Turks are hostile to the Iranians. So, people are preventing players from getting on the battlefield and obliterating ISIS the way they need to be obliterated. I'm going to leave the Donald Trump question only because I make it a point to be nonpartisan.
Okay.
And so I just stay away from politics, even my local politics. So,
okay.
But they do need to be obliterated. And hey, whatever. I don't care who's there. I just want to see that result.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair. I can let you off the hook on the Trump thing. All
right.
I was going to bring up a political thing, and I'll maybe just see if you want to comment if you agree or not. But I see Muslims almost as being used by Democrats and liberals. We know 70+% of them will vote Democrat or liberal when they come over here, and it's almost like they're pawns in a political game, and they don't really care about saving them over there. They're just utilizing the situation, almost taking them hostage. Say, let's get them over in the country. We'll get their votes and we'll press them and whatever. I just feel like they don't really care about the Muslim people. At least the Democrats and the liberals anyway. It's like they seem to want to get their votes, but they don't want to go over there and help them. Like I look at what happens and I don't understand why they won't go in and help these Muslim people. Like I think we need a Sunni army to defeat them.
Yeah.
I think it has to be a Sunni army that does it, but they need the intelligence and the experience and the training from U.S. and Canadian and all these different people like yourself.
And
right?
and it's being done. It's being done. Every time you hear about advisors over there. But let me again speak to your point. Sure, politicians, man, they want votes, right? That's what they live for.
Right.
And maybe, I don't know the numbers you're looking at. I think the numbers would be still too small just from the refugee side.
Right.
But if I can, let me make a comment, and I'll avoid the political pitfalls, of course.
Right.
I think what you see is you do see a divide between, what you want to maybe call the left and the right. I do see that. I do see a hyper reluctance on one end to say certain words, to say, listen, this is why I'm openly, I talk about the role of ideology, jihadist, Islamist, whatever you want to call it. It's mentioned in the Islamic sources. It's actually spoken of as, yep, these guys will come. They're associated with the Antichrist. Pretty clear cut. So it's actually not attacking the religion because the religion itself is saying, these guys, your prophet said, kill them where you find them. It's pretty unequivocal.
Right.
On the other hand, of course, you do have this hyperinflation. So, you see some Muslims praying in a park or wherever, don't call the cops, right? Armed response, everyone has to be, it takes away resources from police, right? We don't want to do that. There are a lot of bad people out there who are like plotting at any given moment. Like the threat is very real, right? It's just what a handful of people can do in terms of the damage that they can cause. So just, like linking it back to the Orlando shooter, Disney, for example, saying that, hey, we reported the husband and wife because we thought they were casing the joint. Well, that security is trained to look for these kinds of behavioral anomalies, right? When somebody's acting shady. You can see it, right? It's obvious. That's the thing. It's observable. So this is, I think, the middle ground is, on one hand, you can't deny it. You can't say, nope, it's got nothing to do with Islam. That is factually incorrect, right?
Right.
I don't say Islam is to blame and Islam is at fault, but I will say, yes, there is an ideology that the Prophet himself mentioned that is a problem. So there it is, right? So there is a middle ground, and I think that's where people should start focusing on.
Yeah, and I find the middle ground's a tough place to be. You either have to
Yeah,
buy into the total right side and hate all Muslims, or you're on the left side and you love all Muslims. There's no
right.
like the minute I get
No,
in the middle, I get attacked. If I stand up and I'll say, you know what, there
yeah,
are Muslims that don't believe this. There's Muslims that want peace and they want to mesh into Western culture and just live their lives, and they don't support this. They're embarrassed by it. So and then I'll get attacked by having that opinion, right? And so it's like you're stuck either far right or far left, and we need to drag people into the middle on this before I think we're ever going to see a solution.
yeah. When people are hyper polarized like that, it just, you can never say all of any group. I used to believe this myself. When I wore that hat, I looked at all non-Muslims the same. I said, first of all, you're all non-Muslims. It was either Muslim and non-Muslim, and that was it. Right? There was no in between
Right.
until you actually realize, no, actually there are people who are actually just like you. They want to live life like everyone else. They want to see their kids go to school. They want to see their grandkids grow up. The vast majority of people, they really are like that, right? And you have to, we got to get, especially those, I'm big on the religious side of things, especially for those who subscribe to religious faith, especially Abrahamic faith, especially those who believe in, the second coming of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him. These are points that we need to unite on, because otherwise, you know what, it's, where are we going to get, where are we going to go? Like, if do we want it to get worse? Because it very easily can get worse, right? And then it's just, once we go down that road, I mean, do we want it to be something we can't walk back from?
Exactly, yeah. And I know you've only got a few minutes left here, so I want to just end it on you, because your life must be in danger, is it not?
I get death threats, sure.
Yeah, but I mean, you're leaving for where again tomorrow? You said you were going overseas?
Yeah, I'm going to Poland.
Oh,
I'm doing a
Poland.
special forces training there. Yeah. No hot spots yet.
Oh, okay,
In
that's good then.
Bulgaria, but no, I'm far away from them. It's difficult to get to me. I have my friends in different agencies looking out for me. I'm not going to tough talk it, but I mean, if somebody showed up,
Hmm.
what's the saying? I don't, what was it? So my job is just to arrange the meeting, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, uh, I just know anybody that speaks out. It's just always a threat for them. Like, do you know who Ayan Hersey is?
I know who Ayan Ali is. Yeah, my thing is I find them too hostile.
Right.
I get their position. I get it. I mean, you can very easy, you can convince people of that narrative.
Hmm.
Islam is the danger. Islam is the cancer. It's the poison. You got to get rid of it. But I shrug, because you can't, you will not eliminate Islam like that. This has been tried. During the Crusades, there was this whole discussion.
Right.
Even when the Muslim armies were outside of France, there was a real invasion of Muslims, right? So these discussions have been had. Again, I come to the religious side of things, especially Jews, Christians, and Muslims. These three, their destinies are intertwined. People can say what they want. You can have anti-Semitic Arabs, wanting the complete destruction of Israel. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. ISIS
Yeah.
can want to destroy all the Christians. It's just not going to happen. This is God's power. These destinies are tied, and I suggest, or I come on the side of, don't make everyone the enemy. Find the ones who are your allies and fight your enemies together.
Yeah, I would agree. And yeah, I think Ayan is a product of her upbringing. I've read her books,
Of course,
and
yeah,
and
yeah.
the way
It's
she was
horrible
raised.
what you went through. Absolutely.
Yeah, like I was horrified when I read some of the
How
things
can that not mess you up, right?
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't I don't blame her condition at all. I
right.
totally understand it.
Yeah, and I think she had a close friend that I think that may have been murdered in front of her or near her for
Hmm.
having anti-Islamic things. So that's why I sort of brought up the whole, how, are you in danger? And I know you had the Toronto, what was it, 18, Toronto 18 gang that
Yeah, Toronto
you're
18,
in.
11 were convicted. A number of them got out. I mean, they did their time. Some are still there.
Yeah.
But the last threat I got was from the wife of a guy who had been killed by a predator drone strike.
Okay.
So, you know, these same people, they're being hunted just the same. So, I
Yeah.
always say, knock, knock, it's JSOC.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Would love to talk to you a lot more, and I think you're going to come back. We'll talk again, but I think you've got another call now, so I'm gonna let you go. We're gonna end it here. I love talking to you. It was great, and you're super knowledgeable, and I can't wait to get you on and pick your brain some more. So thanks very much for doing this.
Absolutely, most welcome, and God bless.
All right, I'm gonna end it here, and I'll talk to you real quick. So we're gonna end the program.